Welcome, Chris Evans Radio. We are back with Little Dave and guest IFBB Pro Nate Spear. Nate, welcome to the channel.
What's up, guys? How
We
we doing
are
today?
super stoked to have you on. We've been trying for a few weeks, and with the theme of all things that Dave and I talk about, with I think now most people probably refer to it like as old head bodybuilding. Like you fit in perfectly with the conversation of you know it's really hard, I think, a lot of times when we get new clients or people who follow us ask questions and the about how to level up or how did you guys make so much progress or how did that you get that client to grow like that. And a lot of times I feel like all three of our answers probably are what most guys want to hear, which is, you got to work your fucking face off and eat a bunch of food. And then when it's time to suffer, you take it off. And even though, I think we all can admit that the power of steroids and drugs and gear are there, we all know that most physiques aren't built that way, outside of maybe some genetic freaks or outliers. So, Nate, I thought the first question I'd ask you to get you to kind of roll this out for us is, when you were coming up in bodybuilding and you were looking at exercise selection and how to get better, like what drove your ship on you knew what would push the needle for progression for you?
Um, I guess for me, it was just I knew intensity was king. So I guess, and also too, like just watching the guys that were coming before me, I guess I saw guys that were like training their balls off, like Juan Morel, um, Branch Warren, those kind of guys. That's the guys I was looking up to. And I knew that I think and Dorian, like the biggest thing that stuck with me from Dorian was just like whatever you come into the gym and train, you have to train harder the next time. And that was something that always stuck with me, you know what I mean? So I always was like, if I push myself as hard as I can in the gym, I know I'm gonna grow. And that's what happened, honestly, is like for me, honestly, training was a huge part as my first growth push or whatever, because my nutrition, honestly, I won't lie, it wasn't perfect when I first started, but I made crazy gains because I pushed myself in the gym. I trained my ass off, and I really didn't think too much about overtraining. I didn't think too much about rest because I was young, you know what I mean? And I was just fresh getting started, and I responded to pretty much a lot of stuff in the gym just by pushing myself to the limits. And like I was saying before we got on this podcast, was a lot of these kids are spoiled these days because there's so many of these nice gyms with like these new equipment. And like we were talking about at the beginning, I didn't have much equipment selection because I was in a very country area in northern Hampshire, and so it was a lot of squats, a lot of lunges, a lot of the basics really. And I do firmly believe that that built like a layer of density when I first started bodybuilding. And I do think that's a key component for a lot of these young guys coming up is, to keep that kind of stuff into play, even if they think, hey, squats isn't going to build my quads optimally. You know what I mean? I think it does build a good foundation, and it does help build density, to the muscle. Whereas if you sort of just start from machines straight up, it's like, yeah, you can build a lot of muscle and round but like I don't think it builds that density and like sort of like that graininess, especially if you don't really have that genetically,
Yep.
So I would say, just sticking to the basics. Like I benched a lot. I know you're not supposed to bench, but I deadlifted a lot. And I guess I just looked at whatever. I was the type of guy, like if it's harder, I want to do it. And you know what I mean? That always stuck with me. Like Jansen had that quote, do the hard stuff, and that always stuck with me. Like lunges, I don't want to do lunges. They suck. They're the worst thing ever. But they give results, you know what I mean? RDLs, I hate those. Like I don't want to do those. But, they build crazy dense hamstrings, you know what I mean? So it wasn't necessarily like because a lot of guys I think now are just like, well, how can I do this in an easier way or an easier fashion? Whether it's diet, cardio, let me get my steps in. I don't do cardio, let me instead of squats, I'm going to do this very fancy Panada machine or whatever. You know what I mean? It's for me, I guess I gravitated towards the hard stuff, and I felt like that got me a lot of progress. You know what I mean?
It's
Oh, yeah,
wild.
100%.
That is what Dave and I talk about all the time, right? Is everyone's looking for hacks and easy ways to get to the end where I feel like our generation of lifting was like, just do things that fucking cripple you and repeat that process over and over again until change and progress happens. And it's really weird to me when I have a conversation of, if you were talking about squatting, for example, like that's where I feel like, and I know I built the base and foundation of my leg training. And even though you aren't going to see me now with a bar on my back, like the amount of years working up to 5 plates, stripping down to 3 plates, and seeing how many you can get with my buddies and I just banging back and forth. Like those are some of the best sessions where we'd be in a squat rack for an hour, and it was like every
Right.
set you were just seeing how far you could go. And that, as you said, that adds a different look and density to the muscle. And it's it's very similar to the thought process of we just try to go in there and kill each other. It wasn't about I don't even remember the word overtraining or optimal. It was just like, how can we torture that muscle until somebody breaks? I
And
mean, Dave,
I don't know, it worked.
I
I
know
mean, I
that's your
did
style of training. So
any young
Oh, 100%.
I was gonna say any young kid that you see really that has that. I look at it too as like we're athletes. You know what I
yeah,
mean? You don't. So like if I go to a basketball practice and my coach tells me to go suicides until I puke, I'm gonna go do suicides till I puke. So I use that mentality into my bodybuilding. Why would I? It's the same thing when I do cardio. I get on that cardio and I think, okay, I'm an athlete. I'm checking in. I'm going to do work. I'm not here to just make it as easy as possible, like actually put some effort into my cardio. And I think of myself as an athlete, I'm here to perform. You know what I mean? Where a lot of these guys, they have that weak mindset. You got to have a champion mindset. You got to build. That's the thing about bodybuilding too. I think mindset is so huge because it's just the mind is so powerful. If I think one thing, then that's what I'm going to believe and I'm going to feel. You know what I mean? Whether that's the other way or they're not. Meaning like, okay, if I go into cardio and oh, this sucks. I don't want to do this. I hate this. Or I can go in there, shit, I want to get this cardio done. I want to kill it so I can get leaner. I can get more shredded. You know what I mean? Because that's my mindset always in prep is I want to be shredded. You know what I mean? Like tomorrow, like what I'll do whatever it
Yeah.
takes. And that's how it should be.
that is,
Yeah.
I think, Dave, that I know working with you as your coach, like that is one of the chief differences that I've always experienced with you is I reduce your carbs, add cardio, you're like, fuck yeah, done. Like there's no
Right.
questions about it. So maybe talk to the viewers here, like what is that thought process like when I make your either training or diet or cardio harder, like what goes through your mind when you see that come through or what was the progression like to get your mind there, or was it always there?
That's probably when I started with, like, just like Nate said, like when I wrestled in high school, our coaches had us to run sprints until someone threw up, you know, and it was just like, okay, cool. I'm going to run faster than everybody. And I'm just going to see who, if that's me, it's going to be me, you know, like, and like, I legitimately just took that and applied it to what I'm going to do. It's like, it's like, all right, if he says, if this set is to failure, I'm going to find where that is for today. I'm not going to scapegoat around it and try to, call it failure because I racked it at the top or, felt some sort of, pain in my legs well before I need to, the weight actually stops, you know? And just like Nate was saying, like, we're all athletes in bodybuilding. Like, we have to eat for that same reason. That's why we all have our diets the way they are, is to fuel performance, you know? And if I can get one more rep out of the gym because I ate chicken and rice instead of a protein shake and a Pop Tart, I'm doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, great. You know what's interesting? Like, I'm sure you both remember those videos of Kai Green, like in tights and a hood, sweat dripping off his nose, every step on that Stairmaster. Like, I remember being a young kid and really leaning into that. Like, okay, like that's what cardio should look like. It should look like hell. Like, it's not just up there cruising, even if it's low intensity. Like, every step is with purpose, and every step gets me closer to where I need to be. And I think a lot of times that's really challenging to convey to a client. Like, Nate, if you have a guy coming to you and like, it's on a cusp of like being mentally weak or finding that next level so that he gets a better level condition, how do you teach him that through a computer screen?
Yeah, I mean that's definitely tough, and it's obviously going to be individual as far
Yeah.
as coaching. I think you got to like figure out what's going to drive that individual, as a person, because everyone's going to be a little bit different. But I always try to refer to it as like, okay, like you're getting ready for a competition. There's other guys out there that you're going to be competing against. There's guys that are doing this and not complaining. You know what I mean? There's guys that are, like you, like Dave's getting ready for whatever show. Like he could be at that show. You know what I mean? And he's working twice as hard as you. Like you're leaving that door open essentially, especially the guys that have genetics, you know what I mean?
Yes.
To try to
Yep.
convey to them like, okay, you're leaving that door open. You're really that good where if you buckle down, and I always try to tell them too, especially like let's say prep, for instance, right?
Yep.
Your window is so short in time, and I always try to use this as myself is what is 1 month? Okay, let's say prep. Most of us don't suffer until the last month, right? It's
Right.
6 weeks out, 5 weeks out, starts creeping last. You can kill yourself for a month and think about that time frame in your lifespan. You know what I mean? I try to convey that to people is, and the same idea what I was telling you before is positive mindset creates better results,
Yep.
creates a better cortisol levels, you know what I mean? All this kind of thing where you really have to lean into that
Yep.
and sort of welcome it. And I try to tell them like the same thing is just like the cardio thing is it's all in your perception, you know what I mean? And if you feel like it sucks and it's then the more negativity your mind is telling you, the more that's going to snowball and you're going to feel uncomfortable. You're going to feel like you're suffering. You know what I mean? If you're like thinking like, okay, sometimes people like make fun of us, but you know, whatever you can to get the job done is like create that warrior. Like, okay, I'm a warrior. Like I'm going into battle. Like, you know what I mean? Whatever is going to make prep easier and make you want to work harder is sort of what I tell them is like, get into that mindset of like, okay, I'm going in like I'm up at 4 a.m. in the morning. I'm doing cardio and people are sleeping. You know what I mean? Like you create that sort of environment that you're going to feed off of and want to work harder and you're going to like thrive off of that, you know?
Yep. I can tell you this, like something I've always related to personally when like, you're sitting there between meals 5 and 6 and you're starving on the couch and everything in your body says go in the kitchen and fucking eat. I always am like, I wonder who's gonna go in the kitchen and eat. And I'm gonna fucking suck down fish in an hour and just eat this shit and see what happens. Like
Yeah.
I, I've always
That's
kind of gotten off on that, and that's what I
a
love
hundred
about
percent how
bodybuilding.
I when it comes to dieting for me.
Like,
Like I'm like, who am I gonna overpass because I ate this shitty ass meal?
right,
Like fish in air,
right, like,
versus like when did they fall off? Like when are they reaching for that extra tablespoon of peanut butter?
yep,
You know, like I'll just be that guy who
Right.
doesn't,
yep,
and I'm gonna watch
Yeah.
that day's gonna come. Because like Nate says, like 4 weeks is probably like that's usually where things get hard is at the 4 week out mark. It's like what 28 days, like if it came down to it, like there's a lot of things I could do for 28 days,
right,
you know,
yep,
and then usually I don't even have to think that far. I'm just gonna I'm gonna get through fucking today
yep,
and check in with Chris in the morning, and I'll get through. We'll see what happens tomorrow. Like it might be another day of stuck. It may not be,
right.
but we'll get to that when we get to it. Like you know,
And you also know that final
Well, that's the
week is
thing.
cake usually, right? So it's
yeah,
like it's really only three.
Yeah. Right. Well, that's the thing too, is like I always tell myself and other clients too, is in those tough moments, remember that those change because you've already felt that. Meaning, we know how it's like it could suck for like, maybe a day, but then the next day is a lot better. You know what I mean? It doesn't stay sort of in that suck. It's sort of
yeah,
like all over the place. And that means too, you could wake up and feel great, and then 2 hours later it sucks. You know what I mean? So that it's always sort of changing. So I just say, okay, just hold on, don't do anything, you're fine, and let it pass. And it does. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And also too, like to chime in before is when I was talking about, talking to those genetic guys, also talking to the guys that don't have the best genetics is something that I strived to, coming up in my amateur career was conditioning, conditioning, conditioning. And I beat a lot of guys that were way better than me because I was shredded. You know what I mean? That was sort of my calling card in the amateurs and that's how I did so well is because I was always peeled and a lot of guys weren't, right?
Yeah. There is no doubt about that.
yeah,
I can tell you this for anyone who doesn't know. So one of the kids that I've trained with since he was 18 is Nate, is one of your clients, Alex. And
Yeah.
it was really cool watching him go through that last final phase of his prep. And what's even cooler is he's a middleweight and won the overall. And I mean, listen, that was hands down the best he's ever looked. And I remember we get in on the gyms on like we'd hit arms on a Saturday and he'd just be sitting there with his fucking head between his knees. And I'm like, all right, come on, motherfucker, it's time. Let's go. Come on. We have in 1 hour, this shit'll be done. You'll be eating. It'll be good. And I think I messaged you. I was like, he's in a good spot. We post today. Trust me. Because he would be
Yeah.
like, I haven't had a free meal. And I'm like, who gives a fuck? You'll have it in a little bit, man. Like, It's fine. Follow the plan. It'll be
Yeah.
worth it.
He's another guy, he came and peeled and beat some guys that probably, if they were equally conditioned, they probably could have beat him. But hey, he
Right.
did his homework. He worked his ass off and suffered,
Yeah.
and didn't eat the fucking extra peanut butter and, whatnot. So maybe the other guy was, so.
You know what's interesting? Like, Dave, do you think that can be taught? Because listen, I can tell you a little bit of backstory. I don't think he'd ever, meaning Alex, had ever achieved that level of intensity in his brain before that last prep. And so part of
Mhm.
me wants to believe like it can definitely be acquired, but I've always wondered like, is that somewhere deep inside of it that someone's got to pull out? You know what I mean?
I agree. So I mean,
I
and
think,
that's where like having a good coach, it comes in. Like Nate was talking him through all kinds of things, right? Just like I know you've sent me all sorts of things when I'm 3 weeks out, you
Yeah.
know, and
yeah,
like that is like the most is like probably the most critical importance. Like I'm capable of doing it, but having someone that show you also what you are capable of doing it instead of having to figure out 100% by yourself. Like let's be real. I mean,
mhm.
we're all talking through a computer screen here. Like it's not like we're not capable of doing it, but like I we've all gone through that prep where you've had that day where it's like, I don't even know if I want to finish this prep, and
Right.
you check, and then you get a nice reminder from someone, and you're like, oh fuck, this is, I'm set right back. It just sets you right back where you need to be, you know. And those don't even have to be nice. Like I've had plenty of times when my girlfriend's like, you can do better, and it's like, oh yeah, let's fucking fire, it's that fucking simple.
Right.
I think
I mean,
that's the
that
thing is
having
too,
that
like a
support
lot of
group is
coaches
huge.
are
Oh, good.
also coaching these guys, right? Like you know what I'm saying? Like it's like a football coach, or you know what I mean? Like they're getting the best at their athletes, right? So I look at it the same way. And
Yeah,
I mean, so like you were saying is like, yeah, we had, Alex was obviously suffering a lot, and we'd have those talks where I'd say what we were talking about before is like, hey, mother effer, you know what I mean? Like, you want this or what? Like you're so close, you know what I mean? And just giving them some pep talks, and I've been in the same position as far as like being coached, and you know what I mean? Sometimes you just having that, you know what I mean, guy push you a little more, you know what I mean, get a little bit more out of you, and having someone believe in you, you know what I mean? And
Yes.
and those are the guys, I have a lot of those guys that they're like, those guys that are 100% in, I'm 110% in, and I will text you at 8 at night, and we can, you know what I mean? If you're struggling, and, we'll push through it, and you stay on track and you work for me, I'll work for you. You know what I mean? So,
yeah,
We just talked about that a couple weeks ago. It's like I think a lot of times in this coaching world, it's so easy. I'm going to call them problem clients, where it's like the squeaky wheel gets the oil, right? So you spend a lot of time with the people who are like 60, 70% in, and the guys who are always on point, where it's like hit all your meals, train their face off, did all their cardio, like fat's taken off. It's really easy to just be like, hey, Dave, just keep rolling, man. We're killing this shit. Like, and then you have to spend an hour with another client who there's the probability of success there is teeny because they're just not bought in. Um, and I had to
right.
go through a maturity in my coaching business of like, hey, that needs to actually be flipped. Like you need to nurture these guys who are all in, and the people who are struggling, and you got to give them an ultimatum. Like it's time. Either level the fuck up or we're not together anymore. Like it's as simple as that.
Yeah. I've been in that position too, and that's what makes a good coach, honestly, is like, and that's what sometimes makes a better athlete. I've done that before where I've sent a response and I've been like, uh-oh, is he gonna like take this? How is he gonna take this, right? And I've
Right.
gone both ways where some, they get butt hurt, and that's fine. And then there's some that have been like thanked me and been like, hey, and they've changed because of that, because sometimes you gotta be the, dad or whatever, and sort of come
yeah,
down on them. And sometimes those guys appreciate it and they're like, oh, you're right. And
Yep.
those are the good athletes that, you know what I mean? They can take that criticism and get better from it, so.
Yep. Yeah, that there's been multiple times where I'll just send a simple response back with be better. Like literally, you just be better. And it's like you
Right.
said, like sometimes, or a simple like, I know this wasn't 100% set for you, and you have to find those remaining reps. And I don't know where you're going to have to go mentally, but it's got to be better than this if you want to grow and improve this body part. And some people get upset and they're like, seem like it's initially it's really fucked up, but then when I let it like set with them and think, it's like that probably wasn't easy to say. It'd been really easy for me to be like, great set, bro. Like awesome. And that's just been total bullshit and not authentic at all, you know?
yeah, yeah. I mean, that's always the fun part. Is like, I can't tell how many training videos I get weekly where I'm like, all right, well, this is shit. Like your form's fine, but there's 8 more reps left in the tank. Like that was just a waste of your time.
Right. Yep. Yep.
That's where
It's like,
it becomes hard to sometimes be a good coach like that because you have to sort of speak up. And sometimes you know how sensitive some of these people are these days. So it's like you never know when you're like, you know, you give them some criticism on their form or their training and they might take it the wrong way. So, but you
yeah,
take that risk to be a good coach, you know? So that's the way you get the best out of your athletes. So,
yeah,
I think because everyone ties emotion so closely to their training and they want to believe that, we're going to be
right.
proud of them and we think they're hardcore or, whatever, fill an adjective. And it's like, well, no, listen, we all have been in places where we had to level up to get to that next level of muscle or next level of condition. And if I didn't have someone show me or tell me I needed to be better, I wouldn't have ever pushed intrinsically to do that if I didn't have someone that was multiple steps above me. And that's why I always, personally, I always lean into John. It's like, it was brutal truth always. And when you pair like his brutal truth with the fact that I wanted to again, really make him appreciate the level of work I was willing to do to make my body change, like that is when you find a good coach and client pairing and see crazy fucking progress. Like, yeah.
yeah,
Right.
All right. So Nate, what I thought I would do, transition a little bit into, the current state of where bodybuilding is. And we talked about a little bit earlier, like with squats versus pendulum versus hack squats. But I really wish that more kids, and I say kids, it's really anybody who with a young or inexperience in terms of training or they lack the density of what a foundation is built. There's always a fine line of trying to convey and teach clients like, hey, like, I need your form to be good and respectable, but I need you to start ripping the weights. And, I've seen you train countless times over the years on the internet. And, one of the things I always respected about you was like, it seemed always like anytime I would notice the correlation of your, like, say, incline barbell press going up, you were getting bigger. So that is a evolution that I feel like we're almost de-evolving from because we're trying to be so hyper focused. How do you think we can get more barbells and dumbbells and hard work into kids' minds as opposed to this like super precise, like almost clinical approach to training now?
Oh man, that's tough. I mean,
Yeah, that's a big question.
honestly, yeah. I mean, honestly though, I would look at some people might think he's soft or they think they have a preconceived notion, but like even look at Derek Lunsford, and I've seen him train at MI40 and he uses barbells, he clangs and bangs, like his form isn't the greatest, but look how much he's progressed. I mean, obviously he's a genetic freak, he's an anomaly, right? But
Right.
just to say, I look at some of the top guys and they're still doing it. And they're the top guys, right? For a reason, is the way I look at it. So I would just try to tell them, like, okay, you can see all these guys on Instagram and stuff, but at the end of the day, do you want to be a champion bodybuilder or an influencer? You know what I mean? You could have a great physique online, but do you want to win shows and do these things? Because like Nick Walker is still using dumbbells and barbells and he doesn't have to. You know, Derek, like I said, um, Hottie, obviously, you know.
Yeah.
So some of these top guys that are still winning shows are doing these things and have crazy dense physiques, and then the guys that are not really making it and cracking it through that top next level, you know, they're doing a lot of machine work. And personally, and for me personally, maybe I would say legs have been fine as far as machines. I've still got crazy growth, but I have noticed for back, I started doing a lot more machines, and my back just didn't have as much density and like 3D. Honestly, like I had to bring up my taper on my back double biceps. That's why I did a lot of machine work. But
Yep.
now I'm going back to barbells and bills because I did notice like it took away some of that density and thickness that my back had. So you know, just I would say too, there's just so much information out there, which makes it hard. You
Yes.
know,
yeah,
so there's always like it's hard for these kids, you know what I mean, or younger guys like to sort of shift through all the shit, you know what I mean? So
yeah. It's really hard to see the forest through the trees with nowadays. And dude, it's like so many things get so backwards. They're putting the
yeah,
cart before the horse in so many things. They have all these peptides you're supposed to take. They're like so focused on gear, but they don't even have a horse pulling the cart. There's no effort involved, and it's like, why? This is so backwards.
I think another thing that really, to this day, I cannot wrap my brain around is the people teaching these don't have clients that are huge and they're under 200 pounds. That's really hard for me to, I'm like, in what world would I listen to this person? Like, I'm trying to put myself back in that time frame. Like, would I just look at the guys that are enormous and be like, hey, what are you guys doing? Because I want to be like that. That's, and now we're almost shunned. It's like, oh, those are the fucking meatheads. Like, they don't know jack shit. And it's like, oh, they just sling a bunch of weights and shoot a bunch of drugs and they grow. And I'm like, bro, if it was that easy, I wish it was.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem is too, like everyone's presence online is so like prettied up, you know? So we don't really have any like Branch Warrens or guys that are just like, I don't give a F. I'm just gonna like, I feel like we need more of that because like I think kids will like it, but
Yeah.
they're just not getting presented it. You know what I mean? Like where I was saying, like when I was growing up, we had, you know, like I looked up the Juan Morel was training twice a day, doing this crazy hall volume stuff, just like recovery. What's that? You know what I mean? Like Branch Warren, like
Yeah.
well, there's a lot of those guys where just watching them train like balls to the wall, you know. Akeem Williams, remember when he was coming up and like watching those videos of the muscular developments in the
Yeah.
trenches and all that stuff. And
Yep.
I just don't really, I think everyone's trying to make the best social media and like the best presentation of their videos. And so it doesn't really, there's not that gritty, hardcore sort of, oh, I don't care if it's filmed on a freaking Apple 5 or you know, whatever, you know.
And I mean, you guys know this because you've been filmed before. Like, if you're so focused on that camera and setup that your brain isn't in the set 100%. Like, that's the
Right.
whole reason I hired my brother for Christ's sake, is I was like, just film this, get the fuck out of my way, and then we'll talk about it afterwards when it's over. And I've always thought, as opposed, if you're trying to build a physique and not, a million followers on Instagram, my thought process is you always have to put that gym training session first, eat your meals, and then if you want to shoot content, that's a whole separate event. Like that isn't while you're training. And
Right.
I don't know, maybe I've watched like too many of those like Ronnie and Jay videos back in the day where it's like they were like throwing dumbbells and shit, cameraman about to get hit,
Right.
and it's like, man, they were still ripping fucking weights. And that outside of like maybe the Trend Twins and Sam Sulek, you don't see that much anymore. It's
Right.
it's it's just too cute, and I don't know. It's really hard to combat that in my brain when guys are more concerned about what they look like in the gym, like what they're wearing. I could, at that age, I didn't give an absolute fuck. I was like, I just want to know how to get big. I'm tired of being skinny. How can we fix this immediately? And like that, I hope at least that there will be a shift back to that. And it's probably coming.
Well, I think too, like there's not I don't know how to say this, but there's not really that do or die mentality as much in bodybuilding these days, meaning we can make a great living off of social media not being the best in the world. So
Right.
there's not that chase. So I think in the 90s and the 2000s, they had that chase. These guys were living out of cars. They didn't make money coaching. They weren't, you know, making six figures while they're amateur bodybuilding and you know what I mean? They were living off of scraps, you know, but they had that hunger, right? Because it was do or die. You know what I mean? A lot of these guys, you know, they went out to Venice, they were broke, and they had to be really great bodybuilders, or they're gonna die, like you know, sink or swim type stuff. So I think social media has made it a little bit easier to not have that do or die. Like even the pros, like okay, I don't have to do this show; I can just make money off of YouTube, and so there's not that hunger. I think you know, which is hard because obviously there's pros and cons. I mean, obviously we're all you know doing great
Yeah.
because of that era, right? So it's like I'm not complaining, but at the same time there's not necessarily that like, you know what I mean? Like, oh, I don't have anything until I make it type thing. You know what I mean? Like, so it's a little different, you know, as far as that goes.
How do you see that, Dave?
Oh, I agree with what he said completely. Um, I honestly think a lot of people are also just like overwhelmed with like the work it takes to get there. I mean, if you take a gander, I mean, I don't hate to put on hate on women's classes. We just added a category for people who want to compete in 6 months,
Yeah.
you know, and bodybuilding is it's 10 to 15 years before you're good, you know, and I think that's one of the bigger ones with social media is, you know, everybody wants to get huge in a year. They want to be shredded year long. They don't. No one can get like chunky in the off season anymore. Like that doesn't happen. Like it's one of those things. Like when someone comes to coaching, they're like, "Yeah, I want to get huge," and they weigh 140, and you're like, okay, we're gonna start fucking eating. That bump from 140 to 160 is not a good look. You
Right.
know,
Yeah.
it's just what it is. It's like, well, you don't have muscle either, so it's like the food you're gonna put on body fat, and then people nowadays are like, I have to, I have to main gain, and I'm gonna be 140 for the next 7 years, you know,
Yeah.
and then on the seventh year I'll be 150, and it's like fucking Jesus Christ.
Right. That's what I've always respected about both you guys is I think everyone sees both of you now and they're like, oh man, you guys are so lucky. Where it's like, if you look back to where it began, I don't think anybody appreciates like how many meals, how many training sessions that weren't on film had to take place to even get halfway, much less where you are today. And I think that's maybe what is so detracting from it is, man, this is going to take a decade, some less, some more, to
That's
build
the
foundation.
that's the problem too, is like it's tough because I don't envy anyone trying to come up in the bodybuilding game right now because it's not just them, it's everyone. These analysts, if you don't turn pro and win your pro debut, you suck. You
Right.
know what I mean? It's like if
Yeah.
you don't go to Olympia with your first or second year, it's like, oh, we're just gonna write this guy off. You know what I mean? It's like it's hard because I think everyone's expectation is like, oh, you got to go to nationals in a year, you got to turn pro like Hunter Labrada, you got to bring your pro debut like Hunter and Nick Walker and all these guys. You know what I mean? It's like, but dude, that doesn't really happen. It's like, and that didn't happen back in the day. Who was winning their pro debut? Like, you know.
Yeah.
So
I
I think
always,
there's a lot of pressure that you have to do it quick and like fast. It's like,
I'll get a young kid, and I'm sure you guys have had the same thing, who wins a regional show, and he's like, okay, I'm ready for nationals. And I'm like, have you ever been to nationals? No. I was like, I
right,
need you to just go watch North Americans, USA's, just go and just sit in the audience relatively close. And I need you to assess what those
right.
guys look like and then what you do. And I don't want you to piss away 5Gs. And 9 times out of 10, they're always like, thank you for making me do that. I'm like, yeah, man,
Yeah,
you're welcome. We
Yeah,
have a few
yeah,
more shows before and a few more all seasons before you're ready for that level.
oh yeah. Well, that's actually funny. I was like, I have a funny story. Is when I was first started competing, my first year in NPC, I
Mhm.
did great. I had won 3 overalls. This was Andrew, and
Yep.
I won my class at Junior USA. So we did all the right things. We moved up. We did harder regional shows. Okay, we won the overall. Went to Junior USA's like when it was like still people bodybuilding there,
Yeah.
and won heavyweight class. Okay, so we're like, okay, let's try nationals because we've already checked all the other boxes.
Yep.
Well, I went to nationals and I got call outs. So, I was winning overalls and won my class of junior USA's just to give you guys an idea of how much of a level that jump is to go down to nationals or USA's and compete with. And I was a heavyweight at 5'10", and I'm looking down at these guys and they're like 5'7" heavyweights, you know what I mean? Like filled out, same weight as me. And I'm like, oh, shit, I guess I got a little more work to do.
Right. Yeah. It's really interesting. I don't know how close you know Dave's story, but like he's done every weight class except supers, and we're close to that. And I don't think anyone appreciates it. Like, hey,
Yeah, that's
this
crazy.
kid started at like 137 on stage, and now he's competing like to the top of heavyweights. That took a long fucking
Right.
time. And think about, and listen, you were from day one of shows, you were very similar to Nate. Like you were always in shape, but you usually get beat by guys who were just simply bigger than you. And how many close seconds, or you maybe should have won the overall, and eventually you were like, I'm like, look, man, you just got to keep coming back. Eventually, you're going to bang that fucking door down, and that's what happened. I mean, your last show when you before USA's to get qualified. I mean, didn't you tell me like the guys were like, this isn't fair. You shouldn't even be here.
hmm yeah.
It's a good feeling.
Yeah, there was one Utah coach who's like I think he had 4 guys in the show and they were all pissed I was there. And I was like, this is how this works.
Got to qualify somewhere. Fuck. Right. Yeah, I think that may be why we might see a swing to more popularity right now for classic because people think that is actually more achievable. But I mean, the three of us both know like to be good at classic, that is no easily more of a task when you get to the upper echelons of, nationals, USA's, winning a pro show, going to Olympia. Like those dudes are just as much freaky proportioned. So that thought process is almost out the door for me when it
Yeah.
comes to competing there.
Well, I mean, and like that class is, I mean, that shit's wild when it comes to genetics and the classic physique. Like Urs, I believe when he won his pro card, he was 20 pounds under the weight limit,
Right.
and he's barely making weight now.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and it's just like, oh, you know, like that one always makes me laugh because you got people who are like, I'm gonna cut 30 pounds to make the weight cap for classic. It's like, bro, like
That's a tough conversation to have with a client. They're like, I'm going to be classic. I'm like, you're not classic. Like, I need you to come to terms with that. Like, how do you handle that, Nate? Like, when you have a guy who, let's say he's just a bodybuilder and you see it, like, how do you convince them? Do you just tell them? Is it more of a finesse job? Like, how do you work around that?
Yeah, I would say it's a finesse job, and also it really depends like each level as they climb, right? So a lot of regional guys will be sort of back and forth, classic bodybuilding. A lot of them lean more towards classic, and I'm more like, hey, I'll tell them, and I don't think it's any disrespect. I'll just be like, hey, you're more look like a bodybuilder, you know what I mean? And
Yep.
there's great guys that I say that to, and they still look great as a bodybuilder. So it's no
Yeah.
knock on
yeah,
that. And it's funny because a lot of these guys that think they're classic, their best pose is a front lat spread and a side tricep. And I'm like,
Yeah.
those aren't even the pose they're sending to me every week of classic, So
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, a lot of these guys too, it's just genetics, meaning like you were just saying, I've had guys where they look like they could be great classic competitors, but their first show they're sucking down to make weight.
Right.
So where do we go from here? And you need more of a back, you need more of this, you know what I mean? More of that. It's your first show.
Yep.
So what are you gonna put on, 2 pounds in the, you know what I mean? Like, so it depends on logic as well, because a lot of these guys, it's just like first came out, it was the first my 215 peeled, and the classic was like 203 at the time. You know what I mean? For my first show. So, there's a lot of guys, I don't think it's just such a genetic game. You know what I mean? As far as like, because like Terrence is a perfect example too. Like that dude has hollow bones. He looks like he's about 200 pounds on stage, but he's like 175, 180. You know what I mean? So
mhm.
you really got to have cards too, not just the look, but being able to like have that weight. Like Chris Bumstead, perfect example too, right? He's like looks massive, but he's making this classic weight where a lot of these guys aren't going to be able to do that.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm never even scared at like a regional level, or even sometimes I've let them have at it at a national level. One of my good masters guys, he could make classic, but I was like, look, I'll make a deal with you. You can do classic, but you're also gonna do bodybuilding, and let the judges determine where you belong. Last call out at Masters Nationals for classic, fifth in bodybuilding, and I was like,
Yeah.
all right, man, we're good, right? Like,
Thanks for doing my job, judges.
right? Yes,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. If they would have fucked me there, I'd have been like, oh, I hate you guys. Like it was so apparent. Like I could see it. And I mean, like, listen, I think we
Yeah.
all kind of maybe get some like weird prep brain or like, man, if I suck down and I can make classic weight, like maybe it'll be an easier pro card. Like I get it, but it's like, I'm like, come on, man. Like you're a bodybuilder, we know it. And then you see the
That's the
light.
weird. That's the weird thing that's like, so I just don't understand. I guess these days is like, even if I was coming up right now, I would still want to be a bodybuilder. I would never want to be classic. I just don't. Why wouldn't you want to be the best of the best? And like, I just heard Dave Palumbo talking like the Arnold, they paid 60K for the classic. They paid Derek Lunsford 500,000. So wouldn't you in your mind be like, okay, that's where, like, wouldn't you want to shoot for the top? I guess. Like, I don't know, like, because like if me, I take pride in being a bodybuilder. I'm like, I'm an open guy. Like that's fucking awesome. Like I
Yeah,
would like a classic pro is a dime a dozen to me. You know what I mean? Like there's thousands of them. So to be an open guy, you're a little bit more, I think, special in my opinion. So like, why wouldn't I just don't understand like why these kids want to be classic so bad? You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
I guess it's a different era too. I guess we grew up with like the Arnold Schwarzeneggers and the Van Dams and like that kind of generational like muscle was cool and being huge as fuck was awesome. And now these kids are
yeah,
like they like the like, oh, it's
yeah.
muscle's cool, but you got to pretty and like have the aesthetics and so
I think it also, I mean, I could probably guess all of us got into bodybuilding because we wanted to be a little bit different.
Yes.
yeah,
And, social media, classic, super popular. And you got people who want to be like other people. And that so they're
Right.
super drawn to something what everybody else is doing. Like I I I didn't if bodybuilding was illegal, I'd still be fucking doing this. You know,
Right.
like
Yeah.
I could would be arrested pretty fast, but like it doesn't even cross my mind to not do this. You know, and so many people, it's like they're so negative towards all aspects of bodybuilding except being on stage. They hate doing their cardio. Training sucks. They're like, leg day. And like it's like, you are aware this is not mandatory. It's like the furthest thing away from mandatory.
Right. Right. I'll tell you a funny story. One of my buddies and he was actually a client too. We went to the Arnold and we ran to Jimmy Bluff and I introduced him and he goes, "Oh, what do you compete in, men's physique?" When he walked away, I was like, "All right, you need to get bigger, right?" He's like, "Yeah, we're good." I was like, "Fuck this classic shit. It's time to get bigger." Fast forward that like 2 years later, the dude put on like 50 more pounds and then actually looked huge. So like I was like, "Oh, that's such a great lesson there." Like if I'm ever confused that I'm like physique and listen, we both know like the top end physique guys are freaks as well, but it's like no, I guess in my thought process I'm always like I know who I watched growing up, Nate, like you were saying, like Ronnie, Jay, Branch, Johnny Jackson, Dennis Wolf, like those guys in my brain, like you walk into a room, like everyone knew they were the biggest, baddest motherfuckers in there. Like I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Like that's what we want to be, or that's what I want to be, or that's what I was chasing. Not that I'm sniffing that, but I can't imagine going into the gym and thinking, oh, I only have I'm a quarter pound underweight. I don't want to put on too much muscle. Like that's a weird sensation.
Yep.
So yeah, I know you're the same way, Dave. Like you've always been like, how can we get to the next weight class? It's like that's what I've always loved about coaching you is you never said, hey, suck me down to light heavyweights or suck me down to middleweight. You're always like, fuck it, let's just go where we go. And that's why you and I get along so well. Can you explain that of just like how you come to terms with that fact as opposed because I know a lot of guys just fear like, oh, I'm going to be the smallest heavyweight or I'm going to be the smallest super. Both of you guys experience that and still are successful. So like what goes through your brain when you were being coached through it?
Well, I'm 5'5", so I mean, if I'm in the heavyweight class, like I know everybody's gonna be taller than me. Like I don't give a fuck if I'm the smallest one in there. Like if I'm 5 inches shorter than you and we're the same weight, I'm bigger than you.
Right. Yeah.
So that's always been super helpful. But I mean, I've never really had a problem with being in what weight class was. I've never really cared too much. Like when I wrestled, like I jumped around so often because I wasn't always varsity. Like I wrestled varsity if someone else was like someone dropped out.
Right.
I even dropped to 115s for a wrestling match once when I did 132s just because I could wrestle varsity.
Right.
And it's like I put no merit. I was just like, cool, I get to play with the big, like the good guys. Like I'm, that's what it was fun. Like I didn't give a shit. Like I even wrestled like I wrestled the 152s once as like a 135er, and I was like, I'm gonna get my ass handed to me, but like, that's what it was fun about it, and like, there was no ever like, oh, this is gonna be an easy win. It was always like this is gonna be a challenge, and that's what I liked about it.
Right.
What do you think, Nate? Like
That's what I was about
the
to say.
guys you had to stand beside when you were in the supers, I'm just thinking about like Nick Walker, Bundy, and then going to a pro like you're standing beside Bonac. Like, what was that like going through that, knowing like, hey, I'm giving up some muscle, but I still have a job to do here.
Well, I guess like sort of what Dave said at the end is like, I guess feeding off that challenge, you know what I mean? And sort of
Right.
like being that underdog. And I felt like I've always been in that sort of arena per se, because I guess I've just never been that guy that's like, oh, going into the show and like the favorite, right? But I've always been like close at times, you know what I mean? But it's just sort of that's just sort of been like my thing. So I sort of feed off that. And like before I turned pro as a super, a lot of times I was a super at 230.
Right.
You know what I mean? So like that obviously, the guys that don't know watching is like this 225 is like where heavyweights is at. So I'm only 5 pounds into the supers where these guys are, 245, 250. Brent Swanson, peeled out his mind at 255, 260.
Right.
So I was always the smallest guy a lot of times at these super heavyweight shows. But like I said, going back to before, is just I knew how important conditioning was, and I would always just strive to just be in the best conditioning I can be. And like, the year I got ready for North Americans 2020, yeah, that was the year I went up against Nick Walker, and I knew he was doing the show the whole time. And it was just more of just a challenge, and I'd push myself even harder in the gym. In the back of my mind, I knew I probably wouldn't beat Nick Walker, but
Right.
I turned it into a game in my head to be the best that I could be. And I had that inkling in my, there's a chance, hey, maybe he slips up and I'm at my best, who knows? I could beat him. So there's always that what if, and I never want to leave that uncharted or not go there just to find out because I want to know, you know what I mean? And I want to bring my best always. And there's never been like, I've never been that guy where, some of these pro athletes, like, oh, if I'm not going to win the show, I'm not going to do it. Or, oh, like, they get a second place and they're all butthurt and they want to quit bodybuilding. That's just never been me, and I've always been the person that, like I said, I've been an underdog, but it's never, it's never like phased me about bringing my best. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, just because Nick Walker's doing the show, Carlos Thomas was doing the show, I never like strayed away from, if anything, it made me want to be better, because I'm standing against some of the best guys in the world.
Right.
Um, so yeah, and that's the thing too. I learned as a pro, whereas an amateur, I was fine, but you got to play your strengths. You got to play your cards. There's been times where I tried to come in bigger, it didn't work, and sacrifice a tiny bit of conditioning. Even if I was better conditioning than half the guys, it's like they know my conditioning. You know what I mean? So it's one of those things where it's like you always got to play your own strengths. So we see that time and time again where there's some guys who, oh, I'm gonna go against a bigger guy, so I'm gonna come in bigger. It's like that never really works out well.
Yeah. One second, guys. I'm going to go check my front door. What you just rolled through there, Nate, with just absolutely just not caring, and that's something that I always really try to stress to a lot of my guys is this is all offense, man. Like I can't control if you guys train hard or what you put in your mouth. Like I can't control if you practice your posing or if you hit your shots on stage or you don't shake or sweat. Like all I can focus on is me. And at the end of the day, like there's a lot of power if you can pair that with, as you were saying, Nate, early on, with the positive mindset of like, I welcome anything that comes my way. It's a blessing to be here doing this. And I've always thought, like, I know I'm not going to be competitively bodybuilding my entire life. And I'd hate to look back and have just a glimmer of like, man, what if I did this? What if I made my every cardio count? Or if I didn't put 240 grams of rice as opposed to 200, like what would have happened? And that to me, like, I've always been able to go to shows and you can see those guys when they're standing in the back of second call outs where it's like they're just questioning, like, what the fuck got me here? And if you erase all doubt and be like, hey, like, look, I've gotten smoked at North Americans before and just knew, like, okay, I just got more work to do. It wasn't because like wasn't plan compliant. It's just I just have more, I have to get bigger and better. And that's why I always wrap my mind around it personally and try to convey that to my clients.
Right. And that's the thing too, like you were saying is like also just being grateful, you know what I mean? And just to be in the positions we're in is like, even if you're not like the best bodybuilder yet, there's guys that have way worse genetics than you. So
Oh, yeah.
like, you know what I mean? Just use that as perspective and say, well, this is what I got. There's guys that, will never have whatever, so saying, grateful for being able to do this and the training, it makes you enjoy it more. It makes you want to push more, you know what I mean? And like, having that perspective of like, okay, this is a short window we get to do this stuff. And there's not a lot of people that have even the capabilities to be able to do this. And, we're sort of lucky to, be in this position, even if we're not Nick Walker, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
sometimes you got to have that reflection and be grateful for the little things.
I can tell
Yeah.
you like, after John passed, like that was a big moment for me because I was when in my portion of my bodybuilding, I always compared myself to guys who were levels above me, and because I was fortunate enough to be around them, so it was like
Right.
if someone would said, "Oh, Chris, like your legs are big," I'm like, "Fuck, man, have you seen John's? Like, are you kidding? Like, my legs aren't big. Like, that's big." Or they're like, "Oh, your shoulders look great." I'm like, "Yeah, but when I was hanging out with him and Ken Jackson, like, those are big shoulders, man." Like, and after he passed, I was like, you know what? Like, I just have to take a deep breath and realize, like, even though I'm not where I want to sniff being, I am way better than I used to be. And of the entire population of the world, like my physique is better than 99% of humans on the fucking planet. Like, and I think a lot of times people get into those negative holes of they're just like, man, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. What am I supposed to do here? And it's like, okay, yeah, but you're better than you were. And all your actions mean you're going to be even better than you were today. So, like, that's something I think that's always helped me personally.
Also, for you, Chris, too, I want to touch on is like as far as coaching too, you have a great thing to pass on as far as like, and no disrespect, but I mean, you never had the best genetics, but look
Yeah,
now you look freaking amazing. Like you've overshot what anyone thought that you would have ever been. And now you can use that as a teaching tool to these guys and say, hey, look at what I did. And no one ever thought I was going to be crap. And now look at, I mean, I'm like, what, you'll turn pro, you know what I mean? It's just a matter of time. And it's just for you, those are the guys I respect the most, the guys that milk the crap out of their genetic potential, and you got the fullest. Not a lot of guys, even pros, will ever get 100% to their genetic potential and expedite all of it. You know what I'm saying? Like as far as like, hey, what am I really truly capable as my peak? And you're honestly doing that to a T, and you can pass it on to these guys. We're talking about these younger guys, and say, hey, you might think, and you share your story, and that can honestly, that's way more of an effect than the Nick Walker story. You know what I mean? Like, because these guys just sort of rise up, and it's like, what do you do with that? Like,
yeah.
so you're way more relatable and able to pass that on and coach. And what happened if you were one of these guys that didn't go all in and was doing the machines, and where would your physique be now? If you were practicing those principles that a lot of these guys are today, you wouldn't even be half the bodybuilder you are now. No way.
I really appreciate that, man. Like, because that's what I try to embody. And when people come to me for training, I try to remind them of like if we just set a foundation and then just Groundhog Day this shit and find ways to every day you wake up, just learn to love eating those 6 meals, learn to the hour and a half you have in the gym, like maximize every work set you have, and then go home, rest, repeat, recover. And I feel like Dave, since you've come to me since day one, like that's one reason you've grown so well is you've always soaked up every ounce of everything I ever try to teach you when it comes to like, hey, you're here, you hate it, well, let's get here and just keep shipping those blocks away. And I mean, you see what happens. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah. All right, guys, that's been over an hour. So, Nate, thanks for joining us today on a Monday. We appreciate it.
Awesome.
Um,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks.
it's great.
yeah. I knew you would fit in well based on the things we normally talk
Yeah.
about.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I see your guys' watch every now and then, so it's good stuff. Love
Yeah,
it.
I appreciate it.
Thank
Guys,
you.
until next time, Chris, Dave, Nate, we are done.
All right, guys.